Go for the buzzer beater with BetMGM, an authorized gaming partner of the NBA. Sign up and use bonus code CAPITAL200 when you bet $10 on any NBA team to win. If either team hits a single three-pointer in the game, you'll win $200 in free bets. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years of age or older to wager. Washington, D.C. only. New customer offer. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable free bets or site credit. Free bets expire 7 days from issuance. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700.
And the Hornets are going to have just a 36-point second half. Steve Clifford and his former player down in Orlando, Vucevic. Greetings. And the Hornets fall to 3-5 on the year. First time this season that the Hornets have been 2 games below 500. And the Hornets will have a day to get better. We'll see them again on Friday in Memphis against the Grizzlies.
Welcome, Hornets fans. This is Richie, and welcome back to another Buzz Beat, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. We are live following the game between the Hornets and the Bulls. Since we last recorded, though, the Hornets did lose a heartbreaker to the Kings a few days ago, one in which they led by 15 points in the first half. The bench came out to play for Sacramento. PJ tried to keep that team in the game in the second half, but it was another loss there. I will be joined by Lee, who's been on vacation for a little bit. Lee, is this your first regular season pod of the 22-23 season?
It is, yeah. The Kings game was the first game I really got to truly lock in and watch completely live. So maybe I just need to go back on vacation because the Hornets are 0-2 since I got back.
Yes, they do. They do have a great record with you over in Europe. How was Europe?
Fantastic. First time there. Already plotting into about when I can get back.
Were you scouting European prospects over there? Is that what you were doing?
You know, it's funny. The Metro 92's Victor Wembanyama's team actually was playing in Paris when I was there. It ended up being a harder ticket to get than I anticipated, but I was plotting a little bit.
Very nice, very nice. Well, we're here on Twitter Spaces, so if we have time towards the end, we can take speaker requests as well. Before starting, I wanted to remind everyone to make sure that they take out some time, 1 minute, give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts to help out the algorithm, help us get seen by more Hornets fans, and also visit buzzbeat.substack.com to check out how you can get your hands on ad-free and early access to episodes. And we wanted to shout out our latest paid subscriber, Michael, and he is on @LaserGlaciers on Twitter. I feel like I've seen that handle before. And thank you so much for your support. So we're going to get into this recap. It was a game that was probably not as bad as the Orlando Magic game to watch, but it was definitely a slog on the offensive end. Half-court offense was hard to come by early in this game, but just generally speaking, for the 4 quarters, the Bulls were shutting off some driving lanes, Lee, and just forcing a lot of action east-west. So credit to Chicago for doing that. I think the swing piece in this game was the 3-point shooting. You know, just looking at the first half, I haven't looked at the second half numbers, but the Bulls shot 9 of 16. It just feels like Green, especially, like there's players that just come out of nowhere and just start hitting threes against the Hornets. And the Chicago team is like a bottom 5, bottom 3 team when it comes to attempt rate from deep, which the Hornets are too, so I guess I can't be too mad about that, but it always seems to be the case when opposing teams are playing the Hornets. Something magical happens from some random player, and it's just so frustrating to watch. So it was a very weird game because there were points in the first half where I actually was just like watching and the Hornets were making runs, and I was like, wow, the Hornets must be up like 3 or 4 at this point. And then I look at the scoreboard and they're down. Before we get into kind of the player performances, Lee, what were some like the team takeaways, just observations you had about this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the second half offense, you know, leaves a really bad taste in your mouth. 36 total points for the Hornets in the second half. Granted, I mean, they kind of kept Chicago in check for most of this game offensively, besides the 3-point shooting. You already mentioned, I think, Jones Jr. and Javonte Green. Of course, Dragic had moments too. I think the main takeaway, I know it's like very obvious and a bit sobering, but when you don't have LaMelo Ball, when you don't have Terry Rozier, and then when you don't have Gordon Hayward for an entire second half, this roster and this team without those three guys are just completely devoid of like on-ball playmaking. And as awesome as Dennis Smith Jr. has been, and as explosive as he can be on the ball, even in the half court at times, you're really just kind of like, you're just kind of pitter-pattering the ball around the perimeter, trying to drive and kick a little bit, and it's sloppy, and the Bulls just kind of start swallowing you up defensively. I mean, with DeRozan and Patrick Williams and Jones Jr., Devontae Green, even Caruso, like they really just swallowed the Hornets like perimeter creation up completely in the second half, and there was just really nowhere to go out there. So, I mean, obviously the Hornets have to hope that this Gordon Hayward, injury is minor. But obviously we'll wait and see, hopefully tomorrow, with an update.
Go for the buzzer beater with BetMGM, an authorized gaming partner of the NBA. Sign up and use bonus code CHAMPION200 when you bet $10 on any NBA team to win. If either team hits a three-pointer in the game, you'll win $200 in free bets. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. 21 years of age or older to wager. Virginia only. New customer offer. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable free bets or site credit. Free bets expire 7 days from issuance. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-888-532-3500.
Welcome to New Balance Basketball. The two-way V3 sneaker is packed with design and tech built for the positionless player. New Balance's fuel cell platform and lightweight design is made with athletes in mind, both on and off the court. Experience high-performance energy, cushioning technologies, and a bold design taken from some of the brand's most innovative performance footwear technologies. The two-way V3 helps players keep up with the sudden accelerations, quick stops, pivots, and high-impact landings on the court. No matter where you play or what you're facing, the two-way is made for you and made for the game. Learn more and purchase the two-way for yourself at newbalance.com.
If you would have told me that DeRozan had 9 points, Levine had 10, I think I probably would have had the Hornets winning this game.
Yeah, totally.
It's always the lesser known players that give the Hornets some trouble. And yeah, we'll start with the Hayward stuff. And I'll just kind of piggyback off what you said, because there is some news related to him in terms of that injury. He only played in the first half, like Lee said. He left the game with left shoulder soreness, and the injuries are piling up for this team. It's not something that there's a lot of room for error here. And it's surprising in a sense that Hayward actually is leading the team in minutes played. But by the same token, it's not because of Rozier and LaMelo being out. So that was something that I was monitoring to begin with. But I'm hoping this is not like a lingering issue because they are so thin to begin with. But I will say this, just from, the first 8 games of the season, it feels like depth-wise, the Hornets may not be like the deepest team in the NBA, but it feels like they can throw some guys in there. McDaniels obviously is making the most of his opportunity. JT Thor has not kind of found his footing within the NBA yet. So maybe he's not a guy that can fill in for Hayward, but it feels like they're doing a good job of mixing and matching lineups, and they have enough depth, not necessarily to withstand, multiple players being out. But if Hayward were to go down for, 3 or 4 straight games, I think they'd be all right if they could probably get Rozier back, Cody Martin back. It's just a combination of everyone being out. That's the issue.
Yeah, and you almost forget about Cody Martin just because of the high profile other guys, obviously Ball, Rozier, and Hayward. I like they have to get 1 or 2 of those guys back if Hayward's going to be out for like a week, because like Bouknight and Maladone off the bench, as your backup guards, like both of them have had some moments in this early season, but neither one of them creates enough like lane and rim pressure. And like Dennis Smith Jr., I mean, he played 32 minutes tonight. He's got to rest at times. And with those three of our, maybe our three, certainly our three best on ball playmakers out, it's just, and look, this Hornets defense structurally has been like a much more professional defense this year. I mean, even tonight, again, besides the corner three shooting, it was a pretty good defensive night. Like you mentioned how they, DeRozan and Levine combined 6 for 27 tonight. It was the other guys. It was Patrick Williams who looked awesome tonight that killed us, and some of those other players. So it's just a tall order. You start to ask some of these role players who have played well early in the season, in their lane, in their role, you start to ask them to do a little too much. And then all of a sudden, you're down 20.
Yeah. And I feel like Hayward, I know it's only been 8 games, but I feel like he has been, in my estimation, Charlotte's best player, most consistent player. I think tonight he kind of had some lackluster play, finishing with 7 points on 3 of 11 shooting. But let's get to some brighter news in this game. We'll try to highlight as much positives as we can. I guess I'll start with Jalen McDaniels just because, that's my guy. I mean, outside of Hayward, he's my guy.
We got to start there.
I thought his activity was awesome tonight. Especially on both ends. On the defensive end, you see it, but on the offensive end, he is a constant mover. And we've seen how that's benefited him in the past, in seasons past, where he's a low usage guy. And when he does come in for those, small spurts of play, he's going to be moving. He's going to be cutting. He's going to be trying to get points off of offensive rebound. But now it feels like it's coming more to light because he's getting more playing time and he's spotlighted even more with some of these injuries that are piling up. I think tonight he did miss several shots off the dribble. It wasn't his best game shooting, but he still made an impact. And it's something that I will be monitoring over the course of the season. It's just his ability to get shots off with the ball in his hands. And I think we saw a little bit of that towards the end of last season. And now I think he'll continue that to become a better player on the ball. But it just seems like McDaniels, and this is probably just some kind of subjective observation that I'm having with him, it feels like he realizes he's playing for a future contract. He's a guy that's, on an expiring contract. He's playing to show that he belongs in this league. He's playing to show that he can have a bigger role. And he is now given it with Clifford. And it feels like those two are a match made in heaven. He has a lot of the qualities that Clifford would like on both ends of the court. So he's definitely making the most of his opportunity. And we saw that again tonight, even though that his shots were not converting.
Yeah, but I actually think because of that, this was like a really positive and encouraging example of why Jalen McDaniels is coming into his own as like a real NBA rotational player. Honestly, it reminds me a little bit of kind of like early season Cody Martin last year, where, we were maybe 5, 7 to 10 games in, and you started to really notice and realize that Cody Martin was going to be a part of this rotation. I think McDaniels is starting to really solidify himself as, one of the 8 guys kind of moving forward that is going to be hopefully be a part of this organization. He was 0 for 5 from 3 tonight. He was 5 for 18 from the field, but he was shooting 60% from 3 on the year. So he was due to have a little bit of kind of a mean regression with the shooting. I think as long as he can be a mid to high 30% 3-point shooter, that'll be just fine for the role he plays because of all the other things you just kind of alluded to. I mean, he runs the floor like a madman. He's a really kind of savvy and clever cutter, not only off the ball, but also in the pick and roll. At times he had one, I don't remember if it was Maladone or Dennis Smith that hit him, but he had one at the top of the key where he just rolled really hard to the right side of the rim, made a nice kind of in traffic on the move catch and laid it in. He did miss a couple chippies tonight, but he's also just so defensively active. I mean, if it wasn't for Dennis Smith Jr., who seems to have a deflection every other play, I would say that besides him, McDaniels probably leads this team kind of in pokeaways and deflections and just defensive disruption. Obviously his size and his length makes him the ability to kind of guard up and down the lineup. Obviously, he has like some far into the spectrum limitations there. He can't guard like the biggest fives, and he probably can't guard like the shiftiest kind of ones, but in the middle of the lineup, he can really go up and down 2 through 4. So yeah, I am with you, Richie. You've been on McDaniels pretty much his entire career. I think we've seen lots of flashes and progressively more and more flashes every single year. And now he's really looking like a guy who's just a straight up real NBA player. The last little thing I'll mention with him is like, I think the handle is like 8 to 12% better than last year. Somewhere in there. I mean,
how did you quantify that, Lee? How did you quantify that?
So, I mean, you
have a formula?
Yeah. I carried the 5. I've got a nice little E=mc² formula. I'm running on the back end of that's spitting those numbers out for me.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I think 8.3% might be the final total there.
Well, you mentioned DSJ, and obviously you've had the chance to watch him over the past couple of games. And I saw a tweet of yours the other day, just kind of being pleasantly surprised by Smith Jr. And it's so crazy to see like that late addition of Dennis Smith Jr. Not many people expecting a ton out of that guy, but his defense has been such a pleasant sight this season, and one that the Hornets fans have been accustomed to seeing on a night-to-night basis. And he had an awesome deflection in this game where you were talking about his deflections, where he was like backpedaling and he just swats the ball. It led to a 3-pointer on the opposite end. He makes like every little possession hard for that ball handler, and every little thing that he does, like it can change a possession. He even forced the ball handler, I can't remember who it was, but he forced a ball handler to travel because of his pressure. Yeah,
you're
right. Yeah, that's us. Yeah.
Just pounded him.
So he's going to make it hard for opponents on that end of the court. And his 3-point shot has been a little bit surprising on the good end. I don't know if that'll sustain over the course of the season.
Right.
And maybe the numbers don't support this, but I haven't looked this up. But I feel like he's done a pretty good job at finishing around the rim. And I think his athleticism and his hang time allows him to kind of maneuver and, around those defenders, around those limbs. And maybe it's more of like the difficulty that kind of shocks me more than anything in terms of how he's able to finish at the rim. So that's another player that just keeps on making his imprint on the game.
Well, your eyes are not deceiving you. Dennis Smith Jr. is 21 for 32, 69th percentile at the rim this season. So pretty good, above average.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it could get better, but it's always a little bit tougher for those guards. But yeah, what have you seen so far out of DSJ? I know you've only watched 2 games of him.
Yeah, it's funny, feeling FOMO and out of the loop, obviously a little bit when I was traversing the European cities. But I just kept wondering, like, am I just seeing highlights? Is this guy like, and obviously we've got our group text going in the Slack, the BuzzBeat Slack going, and like everybody's speaking really highly of him. So I'm like, there's got to be something to this. But I mean, I'll just make a couple quick notes here. Like, number one, I've been a front office that I've really supported for the most part, but my one big criticism of this front office has been, where is the backup point guard? Like, just, refusing to put any type of real resources in the backup point guard position. And although obviously they got Dennis Smith Jr. like essentially off the scrap heap, basically on like a minimum contract. So it's not necessarily that they poured resources into it, but they did take like an interesting swing at a former lottery pick. And my goodness, I mean, I definitely have to kind of like give some credit to Mitch Kupchak there for finally, obviously, it's still early, but what he's doing feels sustainable. I think you're right. I think it's fair to think that the shooting numbers could certainly dip for Dennis Smith Jr. like kind of throughout the year, but everything else feels really sustainable. Like the point of attack defense feels incredibly sustainable. I've just been amazed at what a ball hawk he is and how strong he is and how quick and precise his hands can be. So, and that void has been so, I mean, how many times have we talked about on this podcast, like point of attack defense. Well, not only do we find a backup point guard, but we find one that is just like stonewalling opposing point guards. The other two things is like, when he does get downhill, when he does penetrate in the lane, I've been super impressed with his passing, like finding guys for corner threes, finding Nick Richards or Plumlee or whoever for little dump off dunks and layups. Like, I think he's been a really intelligent distributor once he gets downhill in the lane.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just like the fun athletic finishing around the rim that you talked about. He's had a couple kind of like reverse alley-oop reverse layups and all sorts of stuff like that. He's been awesome. I mean, I shudder to think where this team would be without him, which I was very skeptical that he would be able to make any type of meaningful contributions this season. And I was very wrong about that, and I'm glad I was.
Well, you say you give credit to the front office, but do you even think that they expected this out of him, though? Probably not.
No, there's no way they could have foreseen this, but at least they took a high upside swing at a position of need. But no, I don't think they foresaw this.
Yeah. All right, we'll go to another one of your players, Nick Richards. You're probably the highest on him out of anyone on this podcast, or at least you've been the highest the longest. Let me put it that way. He's probably been the most improved player on this roster. Didn't have the greatest of nights tonight, but there were some flashes of highlights in this game that continue to impress me. That, you know, when you look at him, he's not like this like crazy athlete that could get up off the court. But there have been some like plays this game and this season where he just explodes off the court for a dunk that just surprised me. Like there was also one pick and roll finish that he had. The pass wasn't the greatest. It was almost like behind him, and he catches it in stride and goes up without any hiccups. And I know I've mentioned this over the offseason and this season too, but like he's a very underrated pick and roll big. Like he's not a big leaper. He's not a crazy athlete, but if you put him in a pick and roll situation, he's going to be able to finish more times than not. I think, you know, what opposing teams probably should do is when he does catch that ball in the pick and roll, double, force him to pass. I think that's a spot where, you know, you could probably cause him to make a mistake or two. So pleasant surprise from Richards, not necessarily awesome game tonight, but also too, he also met Jones Jr. at the rim and erased a would-be dunk there. So your man Richards, vindication, right, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I was really high on him, at least relative to consensus. I was really high on him in the 2020 draft process. It's taken some time, and I'd be lying if I said there weren't, kind of moments of doubt. There were times where, I wondered if this kind of like, quote unquote breakout, I mean, he's proving that he's an NBA rotation player, I think right now. Obviously he's still probably just that, I think he's still got a long ways to go to prove that he can be kind of an every night starter. I don't think we're quite there yet, obviously, but yeah, it does feel good. A guy that I have had a lot of confidence in on the like kind of the long-term developmental arc path, and he's finally really coming into his own. Like you said, not his greatest night tonight. Both the last two games have not necessarily been his greatest performance, but he just, for a team right now, particularly that is lacking kind of offensive punch, the extra possessions he creates. I mean, right now he's one of the best offensive rebounders in the NBA. So anytime you can get an athletic big that can create extra opportunities for a team that is struggling offensively, I think that's super valuable. And then what you already mentioned, like being a competent pick and roll partner for some of these young guards that are thrust into really big roles right now, Bouknight, Maladone, Dennis Smith Jr. That is makes their life a little bit easier. And again, it's just kind of another example of second round found money that Mitch Kupchak has kind of made a brand of here with the Hornets, going back to Devontae Graham and Cody Martin and Jalen McDaniels and now Nick Richards. I mean, that's four guys just rattled off the top of my head that Kupchak has drafted in the second round. So he's and look, he developed at times in Greensboro, and Mark Williams is going to be in Greensboro now for a little bit. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, Mark Williams is lottery pick or fringe lottery pick, and Nick Richards was a second rounder, so it's a little bit of a different situation. But still, I think will be a good thing.
You mentioned Book Knight, and I want to get to him before we wrap here.
Yeah,
he had a early transition 3-point make. And I thought, okay, maybe he sees the first one go through. He's going to have confidence.
All the same thing.
Did not happen. Overall, he was 2 of 7 from the field tonight. And this is the case for all players, but it feels like it applies to Book Knight even more. The more dribbles you take, the more time you try to size up your opponent, it feels like your shooting percentage goes down exponentially. And for him, I think he's got to be more of a catch and shoot, quick trigger. If it's an open shot, take it. But when he is dribbling and pounding the rock and really he can't create ground with that dribble and he realizes, okay, the shot clock is going down, let me just get up a shot. It just feels like nothing good comes of it. And I on the last episode, like I don't know if he actually will crack a top 10 rotation when everyone is healthy. I ran down all the players that I would have over him. And to be honest with you, even the 11th player, I had like Teo Maledon. Like I would put Teo above him. So impressions of Book, I know you've not been the highest on him. I just don't know what his future is with this team. Maybe that's harsh. I don't know.
No, I mean, look, I was the same as you. He hit that first left wing kind of spot up three and actually had a couple nice kind of like closeout attacks in the first half too. And I was like, okay, this is kind of as comfortable as we've seen him offensively, at least in that short little spurt. And then that was really it. Like the rest of the night was just like you said, it was kind of the hapless, aimless dribbling, the step back threes, a couple deep threes that he missed poorly. And this was like, and yeah, like obviously during the draft process, I was lower on Book Knight than most, kind of because of that. Like I saw a good athlete, but I didn't see much like NBA level dribble creation, and I didn't think the shooting was good enough to kind of like make up for that. But I agree with you, like when his feet are set and he's in rhythm, the jumper has looked better this year. It just seems that he hasn't been, and maybe some of that's not on him. Maybe some of that needs to be kind of schemed up with different type of actions and him in different situations. He's certainly been asked to have the ball in his hands more again with all these playmakers out, and that's not necessarily fair to him because it isn't necessarily him at his best self. But at a certain point, you've got to start seeing some type of progression, off the dribble offensively, or you need to see him settle into his role more as kind of like an off-ball shot hunt, like set shot hunter and floor spacer. He doesn't have kind of like the off-ball cutting savvy of a guy like McDaniels, so he doesn't really create a lot there. You'd think he'd be a guy who's really awesome in transition, but that's a little hit or miss too. And then defensively, like this isn't exclusive to Book Knight, so I'm not picking on him here, but just like young guards just struggle defensively, so that's not necessarily a strong suit of his either. So I'd agree with you, and I think it's an interesting conversation. Like when all these guys, like when the full complement is back, who's out of the rotation? And I do think it might be both Maledon and Book Knight. I think probably JT Thor would lose some of his opportunities as well because, I mean, Dennis Smith Jr.'s got to stay in the rotation at this point. And the rest of the guys are kind of proven to a degree. So, yeah, I think it's Book Knight, it's Maledon, and it's probably Thor. But maybe one of those three guys can stay in the rotation a little bit. I don't know which one it is. And honestly, I don't have a super strong opinion out of those three right now. Like I was a big Maledon guy in the 2020 draft process. I'm really happy that he is on this roster as a developmental piece. I think he's shown some flashes early in this season, but he just doesn't look quite comfortable enough with the ball in his hands either yet to be like a rock solid rotation guy when everybody gets back, I don't think.
Yeah, and he's cooled off a little bit in the past couple of games. Yeah. He's had a hot start. There's not much more I would like to add about this game. I know that Oubre, had a very strong second half.
An Oubre game. Yeah.
Oubre game. I think he had 9 points in that first couple of minutes there to kind of cut the lead to something manageable, but obviously nothing substantial on his end. He did have another breakdown defensively on a ghost screen, and he just left his man without any type of communication. That happened versus Sacramento too, where Hayward communicates a switch and he just isn't quick enough to get out to his guy, and Hayward's sitting there shaking his head like, okay, dude, let's show some urgency here. So is there anything that you would like to add to this game, or just kind of your general observations before we wrap? And I will say that the Hornets, the next two games they have coming up are another back-to-back on a Friday, Saturday against Memphis, and against the Nets on Saturday. I was hoping for a split over these next four games, but that would require them to win both of these games on the back-to-back. I was hoping a Kings win would be at least one of those, but that was not the case. Any other thoughts, Lee?
No, that was the one they should have gotten for sure. No, I mean, I think, there is some PJ Washington stuff going on, which is great. Like, he's definitely looked better in isolation off the dribble, things of that nature, but we can save that for another pod. I think the only other thing I would say, like early season observations as I'm diving back in, there is like just an obvious upgrade from a defensive kind of structure standpoint to this team. Like they're competing harder. They're more tight in rotations. They're flying around like madmen. And I think that is kind of like the floor raising part of the Steve Clifford equation. Obviously there are trade-offs on the other end of that, and he hasn't had his full complement of offensive players, clearly, but it does kind of, and look, Dennis Smith Jr. with his point of attack defense, like, makes that easier, when you're not constantly getting blown by and having rim pressure, that helps the defensive structure a lot. But I am impressed with what Clifford has done, at least early in this season, from just kind of a macro defensive standpoint.
All right, we'll go ahead and wrap there. I actually ended up checking up the final 3-point stats because I know I only had the first half stats as we started this podcast. The Hornets finish 7 of 32 from behind the arc, and the Bulls finish 14 of 31 at 45%. So that, to me, was one of the biggest difference makers. It wasn't everything, but when that happens, it's hard to beat opponents. So we appreciate everyone tuning in live for our Twitter spaces here. For Lee, I am Richie. We'll talk to you guys later. Take care.